Hi, this is Daniel from Theology is for Everyone with more insights in Matthew. In chapter 9, Matthew continues his sample series of some of the miracles that Jesus was going around doing in his ministry. And in chapter 8, we saw a couple of miracles that Jesus did. And in chapter 9, we're going to see a couple more. And I think at this point, it's worth noting that the miracles that Jesus did could be categorized in a couple of different categories. There are, of course, the physical ones. You know, he healed lame people and leprosy and blind people and sick people and that sort of thing. There are some that some people have categorized as maybe supra or a little bit above physical. It's one thing, you know, doctors, practice the physical, right? And we can see that Jesus did that. But he did some things that were supra-physical as well. And maybe we would see those as calming the storm that he did in chapter 8. We see this in chapter 9 as well, when he raised a little girl from the dead. That goes beyond physical. Some people look at it that way. It goes beyond physical, more of a supra-physical. Some people put throwing or casting demons out into the supra-physical category as well. I might put that more into a third category, which is spiritual. There were some spiritual miracles that Jesus did. And of course, when he cast demons out of a person, he healed them as well. But the casting out demons is more than just physical, and maybe more than supra or above physical. There's a spiritual category. There's something else that Jesus did in this spiritual category as well that we see in chapter 9. He forgave sin. Now, if you're not new to the Bible, this is sort of old hat, and you're like, well, yeah, he forgave sin. That's what he came to do, right? Well, yes, that's true. But when we read in Matthew chapter 9 that somebody brought a paralyzed man to Jesus, and Jesus looked at the paralyzed man and said, "Your sins are forgiven," the religious leaders simply went out of their minds. Who does this guy think he is? Say you're forgiving sin? Only God can forgive sins. And oh man, they went ballistic. And Jesus looked at them and said, man, anybody can say words. You can look at the guy and say your sins are forgiven. It's not the thought that counts. It's can you really do it? And just like you said, only God can do this. So, since anybody can say the words, let me prove to you that I have the power and the authority to forgive sins. Paralyzed guy, how about if you get up and go home? And the guy got up and he took his mat and he went home. And Jesus said that miracle of healing the paralyzed man authenticates, that's what miracles do, is authenticate the messenger and the message. He authenticated himself. He said, when I do this miracle, you will know that I have the authority to forgive sin as well. There are some people who say, well, Jesus never claimed to be God. Well, that's a bunch of garbage. Jesus claimed to be God because he was and is God. A non-miracle in chapter 9 is when Jesus came across Matthew's tax collector booth and said, how about if you get up and follow me? Which he did. And so Matthew records his own following of Jesus. It's sort of cool. And that also, by the way, makes him not an eyewitness of everything that happened early on up to this point. Maybe he heard some of the things. Maybe he had seen Jesus as he came through town. But he was not an eyewitness of everything. But after this point, it seems that he was probably, I'm sure, very likely an eyewitness of every event, at least after this point, if not some of the things before as well. So Jesus answered some questions and he met with some tax collectors, which again did not make the religious leaders happy. And then at the end of the chapter, we see the heart of Jesus as he looked around and he looked at these people that he was healing and that he was teaching, and he glanced at his followers, his disciples, and he's about ready to narrow them down in chapter 10. He glanced at them and said, just look at the people. Just look at the people. Verse 35, Jesus was going throughout all the towns and the villages and the synagogues, and he was teaching and preaching the good news of the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom, that the kingdom was, he was healing every kind of disease and sickness. He was just doing all this stuff, and he saw the crowds, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Just wandering around, not really having any direction. And Jesus looked at his disciples, which included more than just the 12 at this point. And we might even say that it includes we who are following him as well as disciples, even now. Because the challenge is the same. He said, man, the harvest is plentiful. Look at all of the people who simply need the shepherd, need to follow the shepherd. The harvest is plentiful. And we just don't have enough people. Pray the Lord of the harvest, ask the Lord of the harvest to send more workers out into the harvest. That can be across the country, across the world, or in our own backyard. If you are a disciple, a follower of Jesus, Jesus' challenge, and I think it's one of these timeless truths, there's never enough people to talk to everybody. And so we need to be diligent about talking to the people about Jesus and the gospel of the cross, not the gospel of the kingdom, but the gospel of the cross, sharing the good news of Jesus whenever and wherever we can.